Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob Cywes. I am the Carb Addiction Doc, and I work clinically in the space of metabolic health. And a large part of metabolic health in the modern era is caused by hormonal disruption, and the commonest current form of hormonal disruption is insulin resistance. So what I thought I would do today is discuss the concepts of metabolic cycling and how your body works to become sick and what you can do to restore that. Now, it really is an understanding and a scientific and a pragmatic basis for certain changes that you can do. So ultimately, the way the human body works is in two phases when it works with nutrition. There is an intake and storage phase where you eat food, irrespective of what it is. You eat food and your body goes into a storage mode where it's distributing and storing what you've eaten. Because in humans, we don't graze like cows do, where there's continuous flow of food into the bloodstream. We are more designed to eat in cohorts. So we have a bunch of food, then there's a delay, and then we eat again. I know in the modern era, we've become grazers and we've become continuous eaters, but that causes disease. You know, just before we go ahead, one of the things that's always in my head is the protein sparing effect and how to promote adequate protein synthesis in the liver. Well, sometimes the human body uses protein to make sugar rather than to make proteins. And one of those is if you're at a glucose deficit or if you're fat adapted at a ketone deficit, because some of those proteins, about 9 of them, actually when they get broken down by the liver, don't form sugar, they form ketones. So from time to time, if you've had a lean protein meal and you haven't eaten enough fat, popping something like this, Ketone IQ, which is an exogenous ketone, will get you into ketosis very quickly, will restore your blood ketone levels, and then the protein that you've eaten will be used by your liver under the influence of insulin to make new protein, not to make sugar or to make ketones. Look at the show notes down below for a promo code to get 20% off. So in disease resolution, in optimum health, we should have a storage phase, which is of short duration, but a significant amount of food. And then there should be a prolonged utilization phase, which we're going to discuss because it's divided into a few segments. And then you eat again. And this is important. This is probably the single most important concept for those of you that are internet biohackers. You really have to know where along the restoration of storage utilization cycling you are on your journey to better health. Very, very important concept, and I'll bring this out as we talk, because not everybody is in the same place in the restoration or the therapeutic aspect of their health. So when you go on a ketogenic or a fasting, or when you use some of the techniques or strategies in our space, whether it's keto, fasting, a blend of both, the first phase is a therapeutic phase where you are changing things and actually making sacrifices to certain things that are long-term healthy in order to prioritize the correction of certain illnesses. So for example, if you're trying to lose a massive amount of weight, and I'm going to say this, that weight loss is still caloric reduction. The ketogenic method is to reduce or to change why you became fat in the first place. But any form of caloric reduction, which is a reduction overall in a 24-hour period of caloric consumption, that is a sacrifice you need to make, which a skinny person doesn't need to make. Okay? So the purpose of that in the therapeutic phase is to reduce weight. For the diabetic, they want to radically reduce their carbohydrate consumption and get into ketosis for the therapeutic effect. And then there's an inflection point in everybody where you've treated or you've reversed or you've benefited the most from the therapeutic phase of this, where you're making sacrifices to certain normal biologic processes in order to restore health. But then at that inflection point, for the rest of your life, you should be eating in a way that prevents or reduces your risk of metabolic disease. And that can be slightly broader and different. And where you are on the therapeutic to preventive journey depends on you as an individual. You are not an algorithm. You're not a cardboard cutout that fits into an algorithm. But yet healthcare out there has done that to us. We've created algorithms and we plug people into algorithms. And the biggest issue that I have with most of the people that give advice on the internet, I love the people in our space. But what they tend to do is they tend to generalize based on their own pathway, their own place on that therapeutic to corrective pathway. Or they focus primarily on the therapeutic initiation. And then some people look at the long-term benefits, but they all have a place on that pathway and they plug everybody into the same place. And that is a problem. That is erroneous. I see a lot of patients who've done so well and yet they're petrified of not doing better. So they go back to old ways of doing business, which is actually a liability. And in a talk that's coming up, I'll show you that on the blood work that we analyze. So in my practice, what we try to do is first have a discussion with you about where you currently are from a metabolic, from a health perspective, from a disease resolution perspective, and look at some of your family history and your blood work to identify where you are subjectively and objectively on that journey, and then meet you there and take you forward, rather than just generally applying blah, blah, blah information. Okay? There are some people that benefit from a pure carnivore diet. There are some people that benefit from a high carbohydrate Paul Saladino type diet. Yes, Paul's a high carbohydrate diet in my opinion. So who are you and where do you fit in and what works for you? We need to be, and I'm not bashing either of those two. I embrace both, but you got to know where you are. So in order to find out where you are, let's talk about metabolic cycling and the way the body works. So I started out talking about storage mode and utilization mode. And it's the comparison of those two that makes a difference based on your stage. So let's look at storage mode and the evolution of disease. So you eat, you have a meal, doesn't matter what the meal is, and all of that food, and this is important to understand, it doesn't matter. This is what the world out there doesn't understand. It doesn't matter how the food goes in your face. It doesn't matter what form it takes when it goes in your mouth. Doesn't matter if it's collagen, if it's meat. It doesn't matter if it is ice cream or muesli. It doesn't matter what it is going in your mouth. Because remember, from your mouth to your anus, that tube, whatever's inside that tube is actually outside your body. It's not in your body. It's outside your body. And then what happens is that food interacts with your gut and enzymes in the human intestine. Not a lot of bacterial digestion, at least for the food that we really need. We'll leave that to the cows and the gorillas. Human beings have become enzymatic in digestion. The enzymes break all of that food into individual simplistic building blocks. All the protein, all the collagen, all the stuff you eat that is made of amino acids are broken down into primary amino acids and maybe a couple of dipeptides, but mostly amino acids, individual amino acids. Doesn't matter how it went in your mouth. When it went as beans or as a steak or as collagen powder you take in a pill, which is a waste of your money, what you're consuming is amino acids. That's what's entering your body. Doesn't matter what the form of carbohydrate is, pasta, rice, bread, Skittles, M&Ms, what's entering your body is one of three things: glucose, galactose, or fructose. And if it's fat, the medium chain triglycerides and the short chain triglycerides are typically, in large percentage, not completely, but the majority of those are going into your bloodstream, being absorbed as they are into the portal venous bloodstream to your liver. The longer chain fats and a lot of the medium chain triglycerides are going into your lymphatic system in my cells and being distributed to your fat cells directly, or to your cells, not necessarily to the liver. Okay? So understand that with clarity, that the food we eat is represented by its individual building blocks. Now, the food we eat then triggers certain hormones in the gut, and those are the ones that are very popular right now: the GLP-1s, the incretins, the peptide YYs, cholecystikinins, somatostatins. And those hormones, in part, they've got other jobs, but they trigger the release of the metabolic hormones. And when you're eating, the metabolic hormones are insulin, human growth hormone, testosterone, and T3 thyroid hormone. Okay? Amongst others. But those are the dominant ones. And under the influence of insulin, We then reprocess what we've eaten. We take those amino acids, we turn them into protein. Protein synthesis in the liver primarily and in the muscles is governed by insulin. Insulin and T3 govern cholesterol production. That's where you make your cholesterol, that thing that's so bad for your heart. Or maybe it serves a positive purpose. But these processes of repurposing nutrition to usable nutrients such as protein, such as fats. Insulin creates fat storage in the fat cells. So insulin is, with those other four hormones, is your distribution and your storage hormone. And the sugar that you eat is mostly stored in the liver as glycogen. A little bit of it is turned to fat, but that happens later outside of the influence of significant insulin as insulin wears off. But the other thing is some of that sugar gets into your bloodstream, and the largest place you store sugar is in your muscles. The glycogen in your muscles and the influence of insulin goes into the muscles. So those are your storage hormones. And if you're hormone sensitive, those tissues take up the food. So ultimately, the rate and the extent of uptake of that food depends on two things. It depends on how much and what you ate, with actually the what being less, but how much you ate, and the condition of your hormonal system. Are you sensitive or resistant to those hormones? And if you're sensitive, the uptake of that food is very rapid, even carbohydrates, so they don't pose a threat. But over time, if you eat a lot of sugar and starch, the cells get flooded with sugar, and their stores may be full, especially if you're snacking. The stores may be full, and then what happens is the cells block the insulin receptor, and you can't get the sugar into the cells. So the sugar builds up in the bloodstream, and under the influence of insulin and glucagon, that sugar comes back to the liver and gets turned into sugar, and then the sugar then gets turned into fat or triglycerides. So the pathway, I'm going to simplify this again. The pathway during storage mode is for food to come in primarily to the liver to store some, to reprocess it to other things, and those other things are sent out to the cells from the liver, so the traffic is liver to cells for storage or utilization. So the traffic during storage mode is liver to cells under the primary influence of insulin. But then we get to an inflection point where there's nothing more coming in from the intestine. The stores are all full, or at least you've stored what you've brought in. And now the cells are saying, hey, I need to be on the receiving end, not the storage end. I need to use some of these products for my own needs. And there's a flip. We flip over now into what's called utilization phase, where the cells are using what you've stored. And there are three phases of utilization, assuming you don't eat. So at some point, storage phase stops and you go into utilization phase. It's a transition. And the transition is where insulin numbers are starting to decrease, and that allows the release of glucagon, which is your dominant utilization hormone. And glucagon in human beings should be the dominant metabolic hormone, not insulin. Insulin should only be active for very short bursts of time, once, maybe twice a day, and we'll talk about that, for storage. But your utilization phase in everybody should supersede, almost everybody, should supersede storage phase. And depending on who you are, the length of utilization phase can vary based upon whether you're in therapeutic mode or storage or prevention mode. But what glucagon does when it goes up, as insulin goes down, glucagon then gets released because insulin suppresses glucagon release. So as insulin goes up, glucagon goes down. And then as insulin levels go down, because you're not being triggered by GLP-1, now glucagon unrestricted starts to be released. Okay? So the cells are now saying, hey, I need stuff. At first, those cells that have stored product can use their stored product. Your muscles can use up some of that product. But there are a lot of cells out there that have a very, very limited capacity for storage, or they burn through the stores very quickly. Your brain really has almost no capacity to store nutrients and energy. Your heart certainly burns through it very quickly. Your muscles can store it for a very long time if you're somewhat sedentary. Tissues vary. Red cells need a continuous flood of energy, for example, because they've got no nucleus. They can't produce it or store it inside. So each cell type varies, but under the influence of glucagon, you are now releasing nutrients and energy from the liver. And the first phase of utilization is called, I call it, these are my names, is called the rapid deployment phase, where there are rapidly deployable stores that the liver can rapidly deploy to the cells. And the primary source there is glycogen. Glycogen is a form of sugar that is stored in the liver, also stored in the muscles, and that gets released out to the cells. When the liver then becomes depleted of glycogen, there is a reduction in blood sugar supply, and under the influence of glucagon, and the liver and other hormones sends messages to the fat cells. And glucagon is active there, releasing, instead of storing fat, now releasing fat from the fat cells, either as non-esterified fatty acids or in IDL and LDL, which is the molecule you know is the bad cholesterol, LDL. And that LDL is a transport ship that transports fat back to the liver for processing. And the fat cells also release cholesterol, phospholipids, triglycerides into the bloodstream for the cells to utilize. Okay? But the liver then, under the influence of glucagon, does three things with energy. It releases glycogen in the rapid utilization phase, or the rapid release phase, that early phase, which can last, depending on how active you are, anywhere from 1 hour to about 6 hours. Maybe if you bump on a log, to about 8 hours. At the same time, as the glycogen stores go down, your liver is now converting fat to ketones. So it switches off the cholesterol production pathway, switches off the protein production pathway, and switches on gluconeogenesis as well as ketogenesis. And it's taking certain amino acids and turning them into ketones, taking certain fatty acids, turning those into ketones, and also taking some of the protein that you've eaten and turning it into sugar and distributing that to your cells. And that then is a transition from glycogen, your rapid deployment phase, to the prolonged or the fat utilization phase, which is the ketogenic phase. So your first utilization phase is sugar dominant. It's the glycogen phase, the rapid deployment phase. The second one is the long-term phase, which is the ketogenic phase. 1, 2, and there's a third one, the ketogenic phase. And that can last for a very long time, as long as you've got fat supplies. And almost everybody, even the leanest people, unless you're somewhat anorexic, have enough fat supply to support that ketogenic space for several days. And typically, I would say anywhere from 48 hours to 5 days, maybe 36 hours to 5 days, is where the ketogenic utilization phase lasts. And the holy grail of the therapeutic phase of healthcare is to be in that ketogenic phase as much and as often as you can be. Okay? And you can get there a little quicker if you're eating a no carbohydrate diet, if you're eating very little food, or if you're not eating. And that's quite frankly the principle by which the GLP-1 agonists, the Ozempics, work as well. They get you into that ketogenic phase fairly quickly, where you are burning through fat under the influence of glucagon. Okay? So glucagon regulates that, and you are burning fat, and your sugar is no longer coming from glycogen in the liver, those stores are empty. It's coming from the transformation of amino acids, typically the amino acids you've eaten, into sugar. The ketogenic utilization phase can last, as I said, from 36 hours to 5 days, 48 hours being a reasonable time on a regular basis. Circle back to that. However, at some point, you run out of adequate substrate to produce sugar. And blood sugar is essential. Blood sugar, when you're not eating, is supported by glycogen while those stores are gone, supported by the conversion of eaten amino acids and autophagy amino acids to glucose. But then when you run out of readily available protein for sugar, glycerol also becomes sugar as well. But if you run out of a short-term store or short-term mobilization of protein, you then enter the fourth phase, the fourth utilization phase, which is the starvation phase. And you never want to be there. You never, ever want to get into starvation phase. And the starvation phase is where you are breaking up your own muscles as a source of sugar. And that lean muscle mass utilization as a final survival strategy for energy is a place you never, ever want to get into. The ideal place to be in prolonged periods of time during the therapeutic phase is the ketogenic phase or the fat utilization phase. Because during that time, the body's primarily using ketones as a fuel source. It really is slowing down the utilization of sugar. But during that time, you're regenerating cells, you're breaking down old cells, you're repairing cells. So there's this massive pool of recirculating product in the body. Some of that is protein, some of that is fat. It's not just from the fat cells. And that regenerating pool is making you a lot healthier. It's making you a lot healthier as you repair tissue, as you repair body function, as you restore healthy functions to your body. So that is the ideal place, the healthiest place to be. But the time that you spend in ketogenic utilization phase depends on how healthy or unhealthy you already are. So if you're anorexic, you should never spend time in this space. If you are a lean mass hyperresponder, you should spend almost no or very limited time in this space. If you're morbidly obese or have type 2 diabetes, you want to spend a long time in this space. So it really depends on who you are, how much time you spend in that space. And then what we can help you to do in our practice is to formulate a strategy based on where you currently are and where you want to go as to how to utilize each of those spaces by transforming storage and also using utilization phase, especially the ketogenic or the fat utilization phase. That's the way we work. That is the science behind the way we work, but it has to be individualized. It has to be individualized. And there's way too many carnivores out there eating once a day, which puts them into a 16, 18 hour, maybe a 4 or 5 hour utilization phase when they don't have the ability to do that, when they shouldn't be doing that, because they're jumping across that into starvation phase. And again, the only way you can determine that is on the blood work. So it's very, very important to understand not only those 4 phases, storage phase, early rapid deployment, glycogen utilization phase, ketogenic fat utilization phase, and muscle starvation phase. Where you are in that journey needs to be measured, needs to be assessed, and then we need to utilize each of those phases in your best interests and have a plan of action. That's what we do. That is what we do. And if you look at the graphics, it'll show you where you currently are for disease resolution or disease prevention. Now, one of the challenges about getting into utilization phase, and if you watch some of my fasting videos, it speaks to this. One of the challenges is how do you stay there? How do you keep yourself there? Because the body doesn't want to use its long-term stores. Over years and years of energy depletion and of food scarcity, we've developed certain things that heavily push us to eat. And that's something that the obese and the diabetic people capitalize on, that wonderful high we get from eating, particularly carbohydrates. So how do you combat that? How do you effectively get yourself into utilization phase? That ketogenic utilization phase. And the next video, folks, is going to discuss that. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. If you want an appointment to figure out where you are on your blood work, on your story, please hit me up. Send a text, WhatsApp, email, voicemail, 561-517-0642, and let me know. You can also email us at info@jsapa.com and just say, hey, you want an appointment. I know that there is a delay to getting an appointment, but Kim in my office or Julie in my office will set you up when we have the time available, when you can fit into my calendar. And I know it's tough, and I apologize for that. But Let's figure out where you are and let's develop a strategy going forward. You may not be where you think you are. And the next video is going to talk specifically about strategies that we can use to transition on a frequent basis into that fat burning utilization phase. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. If you like this video, if it resonates with you, if you had that aha moment that might be beneficial for your stem cells, throw us $1 or $2. Our PayPal account is down the bottom. We have a Patreon account. I'd prefer that you use the PayPal account because we've had some issues with Patreon. But I really appreciate your support to keep these videos free.